We got Josh Wolfe
Incredible.
in the studio. Welcome to the stream, Josh. How are you doing? Haven't seen
Good,
you
man.
since Hill
How
and
you guys
Valley.
doing? Yeah, with a tie. No tie.
Oh, no
No
tie today.
tie.
Oh, well, we'll,
But
we'll
you
get you
guys,
next time.
you guys are
Look at
looking
the
sharp.
gains
No
though.
ties today, but he's looking great.
Josh,
looking diced.
what's your workout routine? You're looking jacked.
Oh man, we do basketball.
Okay.
Got some jiu-jitsu,
Okay.
some
There we go.
personal training. Yeah, we do it all. We
That's
try to stay
good.
young.
Yeah, got it.
Let's talk about the latest deal. Reflect Orbital is in the
Yes.
news. Take us through the anatomy of the deal. Break it down for us.
Amazing entrepreneur, combination Zipline, SpaceX, guy Ben Nowak,
Yeah.
uh, Sean McGuire, friend, partner
Yeah.
at Sequoia, was early. He and Alfred seeded them.
Yep.
We led the Series A. It was one of these ideas where it's like, you've got the sun. It really is only available for half the day.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a very simple insight, which is that there's so many satellites that are launching. What if we took a giant mylar balloon effectively and had this big planar area that we could basically redirect the sun and everything from solar efficiency so that people that are running solar cell farms could basically get, double the output, to people that were doing search and rescue or military operations. Where could you literally task a satellite, not for visual imagery, but for sunlight? And we thought that that was a very clever idea. So we funded them, probably a few quarters out from formal launch. And the inbound has been insane from all over the world of people saying, we want to be able to task satellites to have directed sun wherever we want it, when we want it, which is pretty cool.
From governments or enterprises or both?
Both. Yeah. You
Both.
can imagine folks in the Mideast,
Yeah.
folks where there's actually money at the government level, but no way that they could possibly do infrastructure for streetlights at night.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of applications that have been popping up that we heretofore never imagined. So it's one of those things that develop a capability, don't underpromise, don't overpromise, and underdeliver. Do the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And people are coming to him. So yeah, we're really excited. And he's super smart, super sharp.
Yeah.
What do you think are the exciting second and third order effects of something like this, right? If you make an area that's dark for most of it, not most, but some percentage of a 24-hour period, and you light it up, I can imagine that would have positive impact. I think there's a bunch of data on like street lights.
It's big for the
crime.
Andrew Huberman crowd.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
Sunlight,
I don't
the
know.
vitamin D.
Andrew might be like, oh, you're disrupting my circadian rhythm or something like that. But no, but isn't there's a ton of data on like street lights and crime, right? It's like if you light up an area, like there's a massive reduction. I'm curious if you thought about kind of the potential externalities of the technology over time.
Well, the first one again is energy, right? So if you're able to produce electricity, and solar is getting way cheaper and way better, but the efficiencies are still 50% of the day when you have sunlight. And then you're doing battery storage. But if you could extend that in certain areas, and particularly if there were sort of adjacent farms that weren't lighting up the city and screwing with people's circadian rhythms, that then could be transported through electricity, through storage and electricity transmission, I think that that's exciting. Sporting events, late night soccer games, all the kinds of things where in New York City, it's no question, and in Palo Alto, it's no question to be able to light up stadiums. But if you wanted to light up an area that was an entertainment zone, or you can imagine things there. For sure, implications on safety, again, on search and rescue. There's a reason that we always say, whether people are hewing towards elements of honesty, that sunlight heals all. So I'm a big fan of the sun.
This feels like one of those deals that kind of lives and dies by the like specific variables in a spreadsheet. If launch costs are a little bit higher, it could be really, they could get kind of stuck if they don't fall enough, or, the distribution of sunlight that's not concentrated enough all of a sudden doesn't make economic sense. Is this more of like a bet on the founder, or have you dug into the spreadsheet and are you really confident on the model evolving, or is it more like the team's just so good they're going to go figure something out?
Well, I would go and say there's different economics for different use cases, right? If you're a military and you want to light up a battlefield,
that's
you're
very
probably willing
different
to spend a lot more
just
than
the marginal solar user who maybe just needs a little bit
for
more.
sure. Search and rescue, are going to be these punctuated emergency kind of things where people may not spare a cost in military as well. In other cases, obviously, military is going to want the cloak of darkness, right? And so they don't want to light some things up.
Sure.
But the honest answer is, on the first part, I don't know what the pricing is going to be here. We're comfortable first and foremost with an entrepreneur who is so thoughtful about every aspect of weight performance, the material science behind it, the launch costs, the capabilities, the cadence, the frequency. And so I think it's one of these things like build it and they will come. And
Mhm.
there's a little bit of faith in that. But I have a lot of faith in Ben. I think he's recruiting extraordinarily well. I think he's deeply technical. He's obsessed. I mean,
Mhm.
truly like obsessed. Like, a lot of people do all kinds of things in their spare time. He's reading like math textbooks just for fun in spare time.
It's great.
So
Bullish.
super space nerd, really talented. Yeah, and Lux and Sequoia
Teaming
for,
up.
forgive the pun, but excited for it to see the light of day.
Nice. There we
Boom.
go. Let's get
Air horn
some
for
air
that.
horn.
Uh,
Let's zoom out and talk about space broadly. Launch costs have been coming down. There's been projections that they're going to come down further. Have you been pleased with the trend of falling launch costs? Are you seeing enough in the entrepreneurial, burgeoning space economy? Are there going to be a new wave? Are we in the midst of a wave? Is the next generation thinking about other orbits, MEO, or very low Earth orbit? What's exciting to you in space these days?
I mean, I'm just going to give you a cascade of yeses. Yes, 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 and yes.
There we
Uh,
go.
Look, cost per kilogram to launch things up into space was the main limiting metric before.
Yeah.
And larger vessels, better propulsion, more frequent launches, increasing demand, all of that has lowered that. When we first did Varda, it was the inverse analysis, which was instead of trying to figure out how do you get low cost per kilogram up into space, it's how do you actually develop something that is going to be high cost per kilogram to justify doing it in space and coming back down.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing for another. And by the way, Varda, I know Delian's been on, and
Yeah.
but I am so proud. Third launch successfully just yesterday. In the
It's
past 24
amazing.
hours, landed in
Let's hear it
Australia.
for Varda.
all
We
right,
love
quiet,
Varda
quiet
here.
down, guys.
Yeah, yeah. Calm down.
Brewy and Delian and team, truly proud of them, proud to be partnered. It is just awesome.
Yeah.
And you're going 25 Mach, 25 times the speed of sound. The hypersonic testing, people have talked about the hype around hypersonics.
Yep.
It's real, and really proud of them and their launch and reentry capabilities.
Yeah.
A related one, which was Tom Mueller, who,
Oh,
as you
yeah.
know, is Elon's right-hand guy at SpaceX for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
We backed him in a company, Impulse Space. And this was one of those
Fantastic company.
speculative things of how are you going to invest in a company today where there's no economy and no demand yet for the ability to transport things, and move them into space once they're up there. And that's really what he's developing, the vessels and the capabilities that
Yeah.
once assets are up in space, how do you think about whether it's cargo transport or moving satellites and all these kinds of things? So there
It feels
is,
like that Impulse could like unlock an entire new class of startups built on the stack of Impulse plus SpaceX. You get something up to Leo and then you push it higher. And, there's some examples of things that can happen, but I feel like if you drop the cost 10x, 100x or something, you're going to see a whole different breed of startups, right?
totally. And in fact, a lot of our thinking around this was, um, you know, it's such a cliched thing that history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, but if you
Mm-hmm.
go back to history and you look at one of the great build outs in this country that unlocked commerce and transport of material and populations and lives, it was the rail. And, so many things have happened during rail for people to compare to booms and bust cycles. But if you look at rail
Yeah.
and you think about the tracks that were laid down horizontally and you were to flip them 90 degrees, and instead of tracks, now you've got propulsion going up to space. It's very much the same thing of how do you get transport, number one, and who's going to sort of own those lanes. So that's launch capabilities. Then you've got communications. There's a reason that telegraph lines were laid proximate to the rail. And it's the same sort of thing now. Instead of telegraph lines with actual wires, you have satellites doing Ka and Ku band. And you
Yeah.
have everything from Starlink to our company Kymeta that we did with Bill Gates, where it's Ka and Ku that are basically switching off of a solid state material with no moving parts. When you're on a plane and the reason that you lose internet for 2 seconds or whatever is it has lost track with a geostationary satellite, and of course it's tracking it, and as the Earth moves, it's tracking it. But if you're in a low Earth orbit satellite, you want to be able to track it just like when we're moving through the city and going from cell tower to cell tower. And so that capability is something that's relatively new for being able to lock on and track satellites. Then you've got people that are making things in space, like Varda.
Yeah.
You've got people that are transporting or storing them. There's other companies that are doing effectively private space stations because, as you know, ISS is coming out of service. You've had geopolitical considerations of
Totally.
who's partnering with Russia or China. And so there is, I would just say, a very robust space ecosystem
Yeah.
driven by the fact that capital follows talent, talent follows breakthroughs and ambition. And there are so many young, smart men and women that want to work in the space. And in many of them, they were in the pressure cauldron of SpaceX, which I think is an incredible culture. As you
Yeah.
know, I'm critical about Elon about a lot of things, but I think SpaceX is an absolutely amazing business.
Yeah.
And I think the people that are attracted to it, have been trained there, are now spinning out, are incredible.
Yeah, I mean, the Varda story is fascinating because they started. I remember the very first pitch was for like, we're going to make ZB land in space. Then there was pharma. Now they're doing pharma and some defense and hypersonic testing and stuff. And it's just a testament to like, you bet on the founder and they'll go figure it out. But they are riding a really, really important trend.
Totally. When Delian was first pitching that with Brewy, I was like, I have no idea if this exotic optical material is going to be the thing, but the capability of you doing this is going to be the thing. And it's really about that economic inversion, not dollar per kilogram up, but high value dollar per kilogram down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even Sean, who we're partnered with in Reflect, made that comment of like, he was focused on the micro and he sort of got that wrong, or maybe he got that
Yeah.
right actually. But the macro, maybe he missed, and super honest,
I
self-reflective.
think I think with Varda he said the opposite. He said
Got the
yeah,
micro
No,
right.
no, no.
he missed the
Yeah,
micro. Oh yeah.
He got the
Yeah.
micro wrong.
But
Yeah.
it wasn't
Missed the
going to be
macro.
it wasn't going to be Z-Bland, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was
That's right. He
about
got
that,
hung
but
up
the
on that.
macro
Yep.
was like, there's
Yeah,
going
and he
to
should
be
have bet on the macro. Yeah, it was great. I think an underrated just story or fact about you is that you've been in venture a long time. Can you tell us the story of like the first fund and how you even got into venture and kind of what you've learned over the last, it's been more than 10 years. Has it been 20 years now? How long have you been doing
20
this?
years. So, look, I'm a science nerd. I was doing HIV/AIDS immunopathology research, and I literally got into that because I watched an HBO movie when I
No
was like
way.
13 years old called And the
Wow.
Band Played On. And
What
Yeah.
I
was
had
it? Was it HBO? It wasn't HBO Max back then. It was just HBO, right? They've swapped back and forth.
HBO, just old school HBO. And it was like this ensemble cast, and I had the right ambitious naivete, which everybody that we ever back does, which is like, I'm gonna go cure AIDS. Anyway, I ended up working in a scientific lab, the scientific lab, 3, 4 days a week after high school, finished that all the way through college, published in 2 different scientific journals, thought I was going to go get an MD, PhD. My mentor was trading futures and options. So we'd be sitting there with a centrifuge of AIDS blood spinning down, waiting to run some 96 well enzyme linked immunosorbent assay thing. And he's making money. And I didn't know anything about the stock market. My mom I was raised by a single mom, and
Yeah.
she was a resource room special ed school teacher. And I got enamored by capital markets. And my life since then has literally been the intersection of science and finance. And it is partially the satisfying thing for my own ADHD of being able to constantly meet new founders, and I never know who I'm going to meet, and then coming up with certain theses and running them down and either starting companies with founders or finding the people that are in it. When we started, Peter Aber and I, who's absolutely amazing. I mean, he's like literally my dispositional opposite, very much like my actual real life wife. He's smiley, he's positive, he's optimistic. I am usually in all black and negative. Everybody here has been indoctrinated with this idea that failure comes from a failure to imagine failure. Pete is like, well, what if it works? What if it actually becomes a multi-billion-dollar business? And my wife Lauren, him are very much the same. They're smiley. I always say, I've got resting bitch face, and it's a great dynamic. People joke he invented the airplane. I invented the parachute. It's a good yin and yang. When
That's
we
great.
started, we had friends and family to go out and raise money for Lux, and I joked that we had friends, we had family. None of them had any money, and we got lucky and met a guy, Bill Conway, who was one of the 3 founders of the Carlyle Group, which at the time had maybe 6 or 8 or 10 billion at most. Today, hundreds of 400, 500 billion.
This is fun
And
for ants back then.
and we met with Bill, and I always say, look, the counterfactual, and this is true of all of our lives, and anybody listening, and any entrepreneur starting something, you just never know. And he was in the right mood that day. Maybe he had a great breakfast with his wife. Maybe he found out that they just made a lot of money for a deal. Maybe he closed a big LP. Maybe whatever it is, he got good news, and or he's just in a good mood. But the counterfactual could have been he was in a bad mood. He was pissed. He was angry. He was frustrated. He was hungry. And we came in and we pitched him on this idea that in the history of venture, every 10 or 15 years, there's some secular wave in technology. In the 70s, it was PCs. In the 80s, it was biotech. In the 90s, it was TMT, technology, media, telecom. And our view was like the next wave is going to be the physical material sciences and where they intersect with computer science and all this kind of stuff. So it's like the interstices. And it wasn't going to be just Stanford and MIT. It was going to be like Cornell and Georgia Tech and University of Michigan and UT Austin, all these kinds of places. And physics and material science and chemical engineering. And so he said, I hope you make a billion. And he believed in us, gave us our first pledge fund. We were writing small checks. We had maybe board observer seats at best. And then, a bunch of those things were doing pretty well. We were building a little bit of a reputation. And then we went out to raise our first real institutional fund, which we called Lux 2, because everybody likes a second fund, right? So our first fund, but like
Genius.
nobody would invest in a first time fund. But if we called it Lux 2,
There you
it's
go.
Lux
yeah.
too.
This is
And,
like
and
announcing a preempted round. We've been saying every founder should say that every round is a preempted round because it
totally.
just looks better.
So Bill
Lux
becomes an
too.
anchor investor in that, and we get this like pantheon of people. Pete Peterson, who's the founder of Blackstone, and Stan Druckenmiller, legendary global macro investor,
Wow.
and Ken Griffin, founder of Citadel, and
No way.
and it was all random connections that led to these individuals, and they were writing, sort of like $5-10 million checks, and then we got a whole bunch of family offices, some small fund of funds, a few corporates like Lockheed and Motorola,
Hmm.
and we could not hit our $100 million target.
Hmm.
Wow.
92.1 to this day. I remember every person that said yes or no, every $100,000 check, the people that have been with us for 20 years and the people that said no, that we would later on, because I got chips on my shoulder,
Yeah.
we wouldn't let into the
You
funds.
wouldn't let him back
But
in. Brutal.
yeah, you got to do that. But so I'm very thoughtful about the people that we ever say no to, because you never know in 2 or 3 years they're going to be the people that you really want to back. But yeah, we started small, and today we're 5.5 billion, and
Wow.
but I still remember those early days.
That's fantastic.
Talk about the new science funding initiative. You guys have been following a lot of the funding cuts.
Yeah, we've talked to a couple
breakdown.
of people on the show about the importance of basic science research, funding things that don't have immediate economic impact. What's the impact of a helicopter on Mars? What's the impact of understanding DNA at some atomic level?
Things that
Obviously,
you can't.
stuff comes out of that, but it might be a decade. There might not be a typical venture payback. What are you thinking about this space generally?
Well, first of all, the roots of venture capital are really two things. It was deep science and it was defense.
Yeah.
So defense tech itself is nothing new. It really is the early days of the venture capital
Yeah,
industry.
Genentech, people forget that's one of the greatest venture bets early on.
And Cohn and Boyer, and that spun out from the UC system. That was one of the early important proof points that helped to create the Bayh-Dole Act. So you had two senators, Evan Bayh and Bob Dole, that basically said, look, all this taxpayer money that's going into universities, they're producing property, intellectual property in the form of patents. But why don't we allow the university to actually own those instead of it being like margin rights from the government? And what that did was just blew out, and it happened to coincide with the ERISA Act, where retirement money could start going into private equity and venture capital. That was also in the 70s, the late 70s. The virtue of both of those things was that you had now this new class of intellectual property spawned from taxpayer-funded research that went from NIH, or National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, the sort of three-letter agencies going into academia. They would hire postdocs, they would do work, they would file some patents, and then there was this well-trodden method, which we happen to be quite good at, where you would go to university, you'd go to their tech transfer office. Actually, most of the time, you really don't go to the tech transfer office. You go to the principal investigator, the scientist, and because they're employed by the university, they go to the tech transfer office and say, I want to do this. If you go to the tech transfer office, oftentimes you're dealing with adverse selection. That's an aside. You give them a royalty, you give them a license, you do equity, you strike a deal, and then you're funding it. And they typically get some money back for all the work that they spent. They also have what's called diligence criteria. Very simply, if you don't put up enough money or you don't advance it, then justifiably it goes back to the university so they can take another stab at it with somebody else. And so there's lots of structured deals that you can do here to make that happen. The university professor, the scientist, will typically spend 20% of their time on the company. It's sort of like the equivalent of what Google would adopt later on, a day a week to do these kinds of things. And the benefit to these universities were royalties and licenses on some of the most important drugs in pharma, some breakthrough materials that ended up in national security. I mean, hundreds of millions, if not billions, to some endowments. So really big deal. And over time, I'd say like probably 15, 20 years ago, venture started doing, maybe late 90s, more and more just computer science driven things, more internet, more, .coms, e-commerce, and they were going away from the universities. We've always had that as part of our knitting. When we started Lux, one of the guys we invested in was this guy, Larry Bach.
Oh
Larry was the
yeah,
serial entrepreneur. He
that's
ended up
crazy.
joining our firm. He passed away maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago. He's an incredible guy.
Yeah.
And we learned a lot about company creation from him. He started 17 companies from scratch, took 14 of them public, cumulative market cap over $80 billion. The most significant was Illumina, the gene sequencing company.
Wow.
And we learned how to do this and how to partner with young scientists. So we've been doing it really nearly 20 years, and we've started over 20 companies, ranging from high-tech nuclear waste
Mm.
cleanup, which was this company Curion that helped with the Fukushima disaster, to 4D LiDAR, to finding real life mutants in a company called Variant Bio, where we go out like X-Men and are trying to find these outlier people in outlier parts of the world. Crazy stuff. But all of it has some breakthrough that happened in an academic lab, and
Hmm.
you are going, and typically it's like 95% ripened and ready for commercialization. So you're not really taking that much science risk. The
Hmm.
government took that, or the university took that, or taxpayers took that. What happened now is we saw a confluence of factors. You got politicization that's happening at universities, where current administration is punishing for anti-Semitism or absence of free speech or whatever it is, cutting funding, potentially
Hmm.
cutting tax status, potentially increasing tax on endowments from like 1.4% to possibly up to 20%.
Hmm.
So they're facing very serious pressures to say, what are we going to do with our funding
Hmm.
if we're not getting it from the federal government? Many of the scientists are innocent. They're doing nothing. They just want to do their work, whether that's finding cancer diagnostics or inventing new materials or coming up with, all kinds of interesting aerospace applications. And so they're facing funding cliffs now. And some of that is from federal budget cuts. Some of it is from politicization, but it's a big issue. This is against a backdrop where, to me, the biggest issue is not anything domestic. It's not about left or right. It's about past and future, and specifically a future that we are competing with China for.
Yep.
China now leads in nearly 40 of 44 critical technology areas. Cultures get what they celebrate, and the culture for Chinese scientists and academia is not our culture, is not the TikTok culture, is not, celebrating Paris Hilton and Kardashians or whatever.
Hmm.
It is build what we can to have an absolute utter advantage and an advantage relative to America. This is, you talk about make America great, truly what made our country not just great, but exceptional.
Hmm.
Attracting German Jews during World War II and making sure
Hmm.
that we were the ones that developed the atomic bomb and having the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, having these amazing academic institutions, which were research institutions,
Hmm.
not, political drama on campuses and this kind of stuff. So we need to go back to that. And we saw that there's bureaucracy, funding cliff, politicization, increasing pressure against this backdrop of competition with China. We said, we already do this NUCO formation and we partner with scientists. Now we're doubling down and we will go even earlier. You lost
Hmm.
your grant and it's potentially on the path for commercialization. Instead of it being 99% banked, maybe it's 30 or 50% banked. We'll take the risk.
Hmm.
Come join a company, spin out into a company, license your work to one of our existing companies, but know that there's an alternative path
Yeah.
besides just facing a brick wall or going off the cliff.
That's very cool. Not to get too political, but you mentioned China, geopolitical competition. What are some countries that you're particularly long or you think are underrated as potential partners to America or potential entrepreneurial hubs? When I grew up, Japan was making humanoid robots. Honda's Asimo. Haven't seen a lot of startups come out of Japan, but we're seeing stuff come out of Talpio in Israel with the
Yes.
Wiz acquisition. We're seeing what some VCs are doing in Europe, and the Nordics have produced Spotify. Where are you looking across the globe? What excites you, if anything?
Yes, 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 and yes again. So we've got the leading AI company in Japan, Sakana,
Oh, cool.
which is amazing, and a bunch of the partners were over in Japan
And
twice this
is the
past year.
thesis for that national AI like
Yes,
Japan wants their own foundation model? Is that right?
yes.
Okay,
In,
got it.
in, in part, it's sovereign models,
Sure.
but it's not like Mistral in France.
Okay.
It is also sort of a very different, almost complexity theory approach to the model. So they're coming
Okay.
out with all kinds of new stuff. One of the founders, Leon Jones, was the original author, and he named the title for the paper "Attention is All You Need" when he was at Google.
Oh, wow.
So killer team based in Japan. All the major Japanese corporates have now invested, and we're very bullish on that.
So
Israel.
Karetsu
Leon Jones does not sound like a Japanese name, but
Yeah. No, he's not. Leon, yeah.
but I mean, I'm sure he's having a big
is
impact.
Karetsu is the right word for it, right? Where you get these
Yeah.
corporations that sort of
In
build
Japan,
these.
they own pieces of it. So the bank owns the piece of the industrial company, which owns a piece of the bank, and they all kind of work together. It's a very
Correct.
cool model.
Mitsui, Sumitomo,
Yep.
Marubeni.
Hyundai Heavy Industries makes the oil rigs and the cars and everything.
Now that is changing because you are
Yeah.
seeing the rise of startups and a startup culture, because failure in Japan is very different than failure in Silicon Valley, and that's starting to change. And so we're optimistic on that. So Japan is number one, Israel number two.
Sure.
I mean, I really think that this young generation of Israeli entrepreneurs are going to be the greatest generation. They are literally being forged in fire. They are fighting an existential fight for their lives.
Yeah.
And people are shifting from, doing apps and ways and cybersecurity, still important, but they're now getting really interested in defense. We did two companies One came out publicly. It's us and Sequoia in a company called Kella. You mentioned Talpiot.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Alon Dor, one of the elite guys from Talpiot,
Yep.
who went to fight post October 7th, and Hamutal Meridor, who ran Palantir in Israel.
Oh yeah.
Just absolutely killer team, coveted, very sought after by investors. The other one is in stealth. Us, Peter Thiel, Trey, and a partner in Israel, Michael Eisenberg, all amazing people.
Oh yeah. We
We all
talked to him
came
at Hidden
together
Valley.
to fund a company focused on a capability that Israel did not really have and needs for some of its most serious foreign adversaries. So that'll come out, I think, in the next few months, and
Cool.
and we'll see some other Silicon Valley investors, I think, join in on that.
Yeah, introduce us to the founder. We'll have him on when he comes out of stealth.
Would
All right.
absolutely love that.
That'd be great.
Couple quick ones. Basic Capital. You guys were the first institutional investor, maybe the first investor ever. What was your personal journey to investing in the company? It was getting a lot of attention this week. It was funny because when a new company comes out to fund like auto loans, like nobody bats an eye. But if you want to give people the ability to, basically use debt to buy assets that appreciate, suddenly it's a big controversy. I think a lot of people got
We're
maybe
very
some of
pro
the
leverage here.
maybe they got the calculations wrong too. I saw, so the internet was really doing its thing. But I would love to hear.
It is controversial, but we think it's necessary. Credit due, honestly, love him, like him, hate him, never ignore him. Bill Ackman really was the seed check. We came in, Henry Kravis came in, and the founder is amazing. I mean, he doesn't really talk about his story, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but he grew up, I'll just give you, in a refugee camp, Palestinian, in refugee camp in Syria.
Wow.
Basically a Hamas-run camp. And the story is insane, if and when it comes out, on how he got out of this situation. Ended up in first Europe and then the US and then Goldman Sachs, and becomes an expert in fixed income and complex derivatives, and is just absolutely brilliant and resilient. So we loved him and his personal story first and foremost. The way we got to him, our partner, Dina Shacker, I think through some shared ethnic connections, he reached out. It wasn't an area that she had a particular expertise or interest in per se, shared with our partner, Peter, who loves a lot of stuff in finance. And they end up spending like 90 minutes together. I don't even think they talked about the business until, last 10 minutes or something. But Abdul is very special. Matt Levine, I think, has covered it for the past 2-3 days in sort of a positive way, which for him, and he's a friend, is a nice thing to see. They're going to figure out their model, but the premise was we allow people to borrow for all kinds of depreciating assets, and we just accept this. We allow people to borrow for consumption. We allow people to borrow for homes, and the theory that homes are only going up, or for cars, as you noted. Why do we not allow people who are not owners of the American economy in particular to own a piece of it? Because that, if you really care about inequality, the wealth gap, is because people that have the ability and the savings to invest in the American stock market and just watch it compound over time, even in low-cost index funds, are at a superior advantage. And so that's really what he's looking at and addressing. And we're very fond of him.
Last question: humanoid timelines, bullish, bearish humanoids. Tesla right now is pricing in humanoids almost immediately. It feels like. But yeah, what's your thought on?
I'm pretty sure Elon is curing blindness, autism, we'll have a whole nother Elon discussion on, his relationship with the truth and some of my criticisms on some of the other things outside of SpaceX. But look, inside Lux, there's a dithering spectrum of people that are super bullish on humanoids and people that are super skeptical. I'm more skeptical on humanoids, even though we've made some investments, in that I don't think the form factor should be 2 arms and 2 legs.
It's a lot of motors, right?
Well, it is a lot of motors, and that's actually a big opportunity as well for a lot of companies. And it is white space because 70-80% of the motors are coming from China. It's about 60% of the BOM for most of the motors. Average humanoid robot's going to have at least 25 motors. You imagine them selling 10,000 or 100,000 of them. I mean, you're talking about millions of motors. So there's going to be an opportunity for motors. Not clear whether it's going to become standardized, special, small batch. But there's an opportunity in a white space there because we are so dependent on China. But I care more about the fact that most of these things are being teleoperator trained. Even Optimus, which was sort of a performative thing because most of those things, except for when they were dancing, were being controlled by humans. So it wasn't really fully honest until they revealed that like a day or 2 later, but it was too late. But even 2 arms, 2 legs that they're being controlled, why am I unpacking a sink or folding something with 2 hands? this should be, in the Darwinian sense, endless forms most beautiful.
Hmm.
You know, he was talking about the diversity of species. I want to see a diverse set of robots that are almost like the canteen scene out of Star Wars, where you're like, holy shit, like, did that thing just have 6 arms and just did that thing like that is unhuman? That's what I think our robots should look like. More droids, so to speak, than robots. But the amount of competition that's here, you know, there's 7 different companies today trying to do humanoid robots of serious scale. Talent is flowing between them, and we're going to see them. The question is, where's the killer app? And everything I hear is fold laundry, undo your dishes, be a companion to somebody in your home.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that visionary person that's like, no, no, no. The way that we're going to use robots is XYZ. And I
Yeah.
get the argument why humanoid robots make sense for a human-built world with door frames and steps and buttons and all that kind of stuff. But I'm convinced that the future robot company that rules them all is going to be either something like one of our companies, Pi Physical Intelligence,
Yeah.
run by Lockheed Groom and
We had them
Yep.
on. Great team.
incredible, right? That
Yeah.
is all about the embodied intelligence.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
They don't care about the form factor. You want to use Chinese Unitree, you want to use one of our other companies here, Fauna,
Sure.
all good. But we're going to be the embodied intelligence.
Sure.
That I think is really interesting because one way to make money in venture is always understand what's abundant and what's scarce. And what's abundant in, say, AI is training data. You can train on the open web, you can train on Reddit, you can train on Twitter, et cetera.
Yeah.
What's scarce in robots is having a repository of training data.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why you've got humans that are doing this teleoperation and training them through kinds of scenarios. But when they enter unstructured environments, what you want is these world models that basically can help somebody navigate a situation that they've never been in.
If a
Well, thanks
founder
so
came
much.
to you named Darwin, would you get bullish? You did you popularize
Oh, the
nominative determinism? You have
is
a
big
thread.
on
You have a
that, yeah.
thread. It's now I think
He's been
I got to
really
figure
early
out
on
how
that.
many
I got
people are on there.
104
106.
Yeah,
Yeah.
106 listings. You know, it started with a friend of mine. I'll give him a shout out. It's a guy, Russell Diamond. He's in a totally different form of business, but I think
He's
I
a
don't know
jeweler.
when I started posting, it's got to be at least 5, 6, 7 years. And some of them are absolutely hilarious.
I mean, the most recent one, it's Rich Fairbank is the
Oh,
CEO
yeah, I
of
saw
Capital
that.
One.
Yeah.
Just
I'm convinced
amazing.
they're screwing with me now. Like some of these names, they're just putting out there. Like, let's see if Josh just gets pissed
Well,
off.
it's
by it.
amazing that you've built a firm instead of being a solo capitalist, a lone wolf, but it somehow worked out anyway.
Well
It
done,
was great
sir.
having you
Well
on the
done.
show. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for
Josh.
coming on.
Always a pleasure.
Overdue for
You
a
guys.
full segment.
We'll talk to you
soon.
soon.